Welcome to Hope is Here. My name is Greg Horn, and if you're a parent out there, you probably sometimes are wondering, what can I do to make sure that I'm keeping my kids safe online? And just so many questions out there with social media. Well, you're going to be at the right place for the next couple of days, because we were talking with Scott Harvey, and Scott spent 20 years in Jessamine County on the police force, and just has a really great knowledge of these type of things. In fact, he travels all over the country now. He's retired as a police officer, and he speaks to school districts all over the country about these topics. So, Scott, first of all, just thanks for being here on Hope is Here today, man.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, tell a little bit about your police workforce background.
Yeah, so I spent 20 years as a Nicholasville police officer. I retired as a sergeant last year in 2018. And in my time at the police department, I taught DARE for like 17 of those years. I supervised school resource officers for 6 of those years. So for the vast majority of my career, I was kind of school-based law enforcement. You know, I was dealing with 5th and 7th graders pretty much all day, every day. Our school resource officers were middle and high school. And so as a supervisor of them, I read the case reports that came across with anything that happened in our schools. So I feel like in Jessamine County, at least, I had a really good idea of what was going on in the schools. And the DARE program kind of led to some speaking, and I spoke at a conference one time as a favor to a friend. And, at the end of that conference presentation, it was a breakout session. There was like 6 or 8 people in there. It wasn't big time by any stretch of the imagination, but those people came up and asked me to come to their schools and speak to their staff. And then their staff asked me to speak to their students. And, the business kind of grew out of that about 10 years ago-ish. And now it's a really good retirement job. It allows me to stay connected with students and use my 20 years of law enforcement experience to help them be safer.
If people want to find out more about this that you offer, what's the best way to do that, Scott?
Then go to my website, which is speakingofharvey.com. There are social media buttons on there, and I'm on pretty much all of the social media channels, as I'm sure we'll talk about through the course of this interview. I'm pretty easy to find online.
Well, I recently got a chance to hear Scott speak at a middle school here in Lexington, Kentucky, and it was just tremendous. It's one thing to speak to adults, but when you're speaking to middle schoolers, you've got to have an engaging talk. And yet, when you talk about the topic of social media, Scott, whether you're an adult or a child, that's kind of a hot button for both, isn't it?
It is. It's one of those things that it's something we've allowed our children to figure out on their own, and that's not okay. We don't let them do anything else like that important on their own. We teach them how to ride a bike. We teach them how to drive a car. We teach them how to tie their shoes. And yet, for some reason, we hand them technology at 3-4 years old, and they just kind of figure it out. And we're now seeing the problems that creates. And so now the conversations I have with students, I tell them up front, this is the conversation that you should have had with an adult before you ever got on technology. We dropped the ball. This is on us. I'm a huge fan of this upcoming generation. I've worked with them for a long time. And, people want to call them the trophy generation, talk about a sense of entitlement, all of that. We gave them the trophies. They didn't ask for any of it. And they realized that a participation trophy means nothing. But we created the problems we're seeing with this generation, and we can help fix the problems we're seeing with this upcoming generation.
Well, one of the things I love, not only do you have it firsthand from speaking at schools all over the country, but also you have some at home.
I do. I tell people all the time, this is not me sitting on the porch whittling wood, giving out wisdom. This is me in the trenches with a 14 and an 18-year-old girl. And, one of the reasons I really started getting into social media early on was I knew this was going to be an issue for my kids. And I wanted to figure out, the ins and outs of it and find a safe way to teach them how to use it. I've been driving for years before I ever taught my oldest daughter how to drive a car. And I figured I ought to be driving the internet for years and years before I ever teach them how to navigate, the internet superhighway, we used to call it. It's very much that. And no generation has grown up under the spotlight of technology like this current generation. And I can't call my mom and ask her for advice on social media. If I call my mom and ask her about Snapchat, she thinks it's a cookie, right? She just doesn't have any idea, bless her heart. She's 70 years old. She doesn't have to know because we didn't deal with that growing up. And so I can call her and ask her about fevers and coughs and all that stuff and get her advice, but I can't ask her about social media. So I have to figure it out.
Well, you've done a great job with that. As I said, I heard your presentation. I know you do several, but one last week here at a middle school. What are some of the basic ways to help keep our kids safe online, Scott?
So there's a lot of things for parents. I guess one of the biggest problems I see with parents is allowing kids unlimited 24/7 access to their technology. And the brain research doesn't support this. Our brain needs an 8-hour break-ish to kind of wipe yesterday's drama clean, preparing for the upcoming day's drama, because every day brings a new set of drama for every age. I don't care if you're 5 or 55. You've got to have that kind of brain clearing time that we call sleep. And the problem we're seeing with a lot of teenagers, especially today, is the technology that they have, especially if it's in their bedroom, doesn't allow this 8-hour brain wipe, so to speak. I'm not a doctor, not a brain scientist, but I've read the research, and I know that without that, we can see some serious health issues. And what we're dealing with students who have their technology at night in their bedroom is when it vibrates, and it won't make a noise because that'll wake the family, but it'll vibrate, and that will wake the child. And they will deal with a problem at 1, 2, 3 in the morning without any adult input. And they're brought out of that sleep cycle that keeps their body on track and keeps them healthy. And there's nothing that happens at 1 or 2 in the morning that can't be dealt with at 7 in the morning. So I tell parents all the time, when my daughters were small, we started with iPods, Wi-Fi based only. They weren't phones. They were iPhones with training wheels. And that's where we started with my kids, fairly young, because they were playing games on them and that kind of stuff. And the rule for those has always been that they charge in our bedroom at night, that there is a time on the clock, an age-appropriate time on the clock, that is expected to be on the charger in our bedroom. And no other technology is in their bedrooms at night. That forces them to take this brain break. And from a parenting standpoint, one of the things we didn't expect about it is, let's say the time is 9 o'clock. If you're going to be irresponsible or sass me or not do what you say you're going to do, it can be 8:30, and then it can be 8, and it just becomes a bargaining chip that, it's not a question of whether it's going to be on the charger. It's a question of when it's going to be on the charger. And the understanding is with that in our bedroom, we have access to it. I know the password of my kids' cell phones. I can check it anytime I want to. It's on my plan. I pay for it every month. And it's on my plan. Now, that being said, the 18-year-old is not. She's off in college. We gave her 24/7 access to her phone about Christmas of her senior year in high school because she had been responsible with it. And the more, you're letting out more rope as they show they're capable of handling it, and you can always pull that rope back in. But now she has it all the time. But I have parents that say, well, my child uses theirs for an alarm clock. $5 at Walmart. Seriously, alarm clocks are $5. That's not a good excuse. I don't use mine as an alarm clock. I use my alarm clock that sits on my nightstand because I'm old. But I also, if I wake up at 2 in the morning, I don't want to have to physically flip up the phone to see the time. I want to see it on my clock. So, $5 solves that problem. But I also had one parent after a show tell me, I can't really do that for my 15-year-old because she pays her own cell bill. She lives in your house. You're still kind of in charge. And you should
She's not making the house payment, is she?
That's right. You can step into that role and you can lay some ground rules. It's for their mental health's sake. So 24/7 access to their phone is one of the biggest problems I see that kids are dealing with today.
Scott, what are some of the more dangerous aspects of social media in your opinion?
I think some of the things that I'm seeing, especially as a father of teenagers, is, when you and I were growing up, if 2 of our friends got together on a Thursday or Friday night or whatever, there's a good chance we didn't know about it. And quite honestly, we didn't care because we didn't know about it. And now kids that are getting together for, maybe their parents got together for the evening, maybe their next door neighbors, are posting pictures of each other online. And then kid number 3 feels like, well, I didn't even know that was happening. I feel left out. They obviously don't like me. And it becomes a very personal thing of a rejection that just is not a real rejection. And this isn't just a kid thing. I saw some friends of mine like last year posted on the New Year's Day that they had gotten together New Year's Eve. And I'm in my 40s. I'm like, well, I would have liked to have gotten together New Year's Eve. I didn't even know it was happening. And I feel like I was slighted somehow. And that's in my 40s that I feel that. I can't imagine how I would feel at 13, 14, 15 years old, because it creates this sense of missing out that is not a real thing. And that's why another thing with social media, the standard age for terms of use for all social media channels is pretty much 13. If you're not 13, the only way to get social media is to violate their terms of use. Now, parents do that all the time for their kids. But social media doesn't decrease drama in our life. It increases drama. And at 10, 11, 12 years old, those preteen years are drama-filled. And I just feel like, giving them access early, teaching them to misrepresent their age online is a very dangerous thing to start walking. It's that integrity check when you're at the buffet and 10 and under is one price and your child turned 11 2 weeks ago. Do I want to lie to save $2 or do I want to pay $2 more to model for my child that we follow rules in our house? It's difficult, and I get it. I've navigated that with my kids. And that being said, there's not 13 and we turn everything on. We started with both of my kids with Twitter as a way to kind of wade into, the social media world. And the rules were no pictures of anybody without their permission. Pictures of the dog, pictures of the house, pictures of nail polish, whatever, but no pictures of people without their permission. And then as time went on and they showed that they could responsibly do that, then we added Instagram. We added Facebook for my oldest. My 14-year-old has no desire for a Facebook account. It's just not cool anymore. But, I think that right now my 14-year-old does not Snapchat. She's not allowed. The 18-year-old does. To me, that's the deep end of the pool. And I think we need to spend some time in the shallow end of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and things like that to show that I'm capable before I get into the deep end of the pool with things like Snapchat. Because when things delete themselves, so to speak, it actually encourages irresponsible use of the product. What would I do as a kid if I thought my parents would never find out? A lot of stuff. Yeah. And it's better to have those checks and balances to where I can pull up your account and see it and read it.
Well, Scott, unfortunately, only got about a minute to today's program, but one of the questions I want to ask you to wrap things up, is it okay to limit your kids' screen time, and if so, how? I know you talked about the bedtime thing, but any other parameters you suggest?
If you are an iPhone user, you have got to use screen time for your kids because you can actually turn things off in the middle of the night, and you can set that they can only use apps for like 2 hours, and it just turns off on their phone. But in that screen time, you can set where they can always text, they can always call, they can always do the things they would need to do in an emergency. But you can app by app limit time that they're allowed to use that. And you can pull that up and see their screen time usage. You can see that they've used Snapchat for 2 hours today or Instagram for 2 hours or whatever it is. And you can point out to them, this is 2 hours of your life that you're not going to get back today. I hope it was worth it. And sometimes it is. I'm a social media junkie myself. But I highly recommend screen time for parents. If you can't set that up, call Apple. They'll walk you through the process. Or if you're in the Lexington area or anywhere there's an Apple store, take your devices into the store. They'll walk you through the process.
All right. Well, if you want to find out more about this, I know it's been great. Maybe we just whet your appetite. Go to Scott's website. It's speakingofharvey.com. That's speakingofharvey.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Ramblin' Harvey or on Instagram at Speaking of Harvey. And he's got a great podcast. If you like to do speaking, you can check that out. I've been listening to that lately, called the Speaking of Harvey podcast. But stay with us tomorrow. If you'll tune in, maybe you want to tell a fellow parent. We're going to talk a little bit about social media, but we're going to focus more on photos and why is photo sharing such a big problem with our kids. Tune in tomorrow as we talk more with Scott Harvey on Hope is Here.
Taking care of Central Kentucky's floral needs for over 25 years, Creations by Karen features floral arrangements for every occasion, from anniversaries, corsages, Valentine's Day, as well as birthday gifts. You can count on Creations by Karen to deliver beautiful anniversary flowers, new baby gifts, bridal arrangements, or sympathy flowers. Contact them today at creationswithak.byKaren.net. That's creations-by-karen.net.